reporting this last week, since we made the announcement on Thursday that the Professional Fighters Association is now in existence, has just been overwhelming, and I appreciate everything that you guys have done. I think you've shown a lot of class and journalistic integrity, and I hope it perpetuates itself. Now, there's some people I would not like to thank, three in particular. I want to start with Dana White. I want it to be professional, tell him about this press conference. I called him and invited him to it. This was before yesterday's press conference. And one of the reporters asked a question to Dana during the press conference. You know, there's been this movement for unionization, and what do you think about it? And Dana said, I don't know anything about it. Well, that was disingenuous at best, because he knew, because I left him a message saying, I would like you to come to the press conference here today. Next guy would be Patrick Whitesale from Patrick Whitesale and Ari Emanuel. I called Patrick Whitesale and spoke to his assistant. His assistant said, please send me an email regarding the press conference and I'll pass it along. That's all that happened there. Ari Emanuel was a little bit different. I called him the first time. He picked up the phone right away. I said, this is Jeff Boris from the Professional Fighters Association. Do you have a minute to talk to me? And then there was a click, and I wasn't sure if we got cut off or he hung up on me. So I called him back. I said, hi, I don't know if we got cut off or not. This is Jeff Boris again. And he, in a tone that only my wife speaks to me in, says, don't ever call me again. I don't want to speak to you. I don't want to have anything to do with you. I said, okay. And then I sent him a text after, and I said, you know, I think that that's unprofessional. I'll let you get away with that now. But once we become a union and we're certified by the National Labor Relations Board, you're going to have to take my phone call and you're going to be forced to deal with me. So at the beginning, I thought that my job was going to be really to educate the fighters on all the issues, minimums, pensions, things of that sort, medical benefits, grievance procedure, drug policy. But I'm finding out that I don't need to educate the fighters. And the reason why I don't need to educate the fighters is because they're already educated on the issues. When I talk to them, they know they need these things. They know they need these protections. In fact, a lot of the fighters have educated me. What a lot of them have said to me, for instance, they asked, we're speaking to one fighter, and the fighter said, if we're successful in getting pensions, what about the retired guys? Are they going to get a pension? Are they entitled to it? And I said, I haven't really given it any thought. Well, what's your stance on it? And the fighter told me, yeah, I think that some of them should. And I said, you know what? I said, the union's going to be run by the fighters. And if the executive board of fighters come up and they say, you know what, we vote on this and we think that we want to take care of the retired fighters, and there's money now in the coffers of the union because we're sharing in the licensing or we're sharing in the media revenue, then I would follow their instructions, I would follow their orders. But right now, I find that the biggest problem that I'm having is, and I'm going to use the word bullying and intimidation. You know, a lot of these fighters, they went into these disciplines, they're not barroom brawlers. These guys are mixed martial artists on the highest level. They know how to box, they know how to kick, they know how to fight on the ground, judo, they know all these different disciplines. And a lot of them did it because they were getting bullied at school when they were little kids and they wanted to defend themselves. In the octagon, they're world class in defending themselves. Outside of the octagon, right now, they're getting bullied and it's almost embarrassing. And the UFC knows it, they're getting away with it, and I think they're laughing at these fighters. And something has to change, and something has to change now. So all I'm asking to do is to have the fighters empower the group that I've assembled and put together to give us an opportunity to go ahead and teach them how not to be bullied. The same way how they learned not to be bullied at school when they learned judo or kickboxing and they learned how to box, to give us that opportunity. You know, I was thinking right now, when I was on my way over here, if there was a meeting amongst baseball, basketball, football, hockey, the UFC, all the top executives, they were all in a boardroom and they were all talking shop. And there's one common theme there in that they all have a union but the UFC doesn't. And I think the UFC knows that sooner or later this has to happen. It's inevitable because it can't keep going on like this. So sooner or later this will come into existence. And I want the fighters not to be afraid, not to be intimidated by the UFC. I want them to empower us and the group that I've put together to give us a chance to be able to combat that through collective bargaining. So if anybody has any questions for Lucas or myself, we'd be happy to answer them. Okay, no questions. See you later. Yes, sir.
You talked a lot about the UFC fighters, but what about the fighters outside of the UFC? Have you talked to like Scott Coker or Bellator or anybody at World Series of Fighting or anything like that, or is it just UFC right now?
Currently it's just UFC because they roughly have about 600 fighters under contract, and they're really the premier league. I'm not saying that at some point in time in the future that might not happen, but right now we're just targeting the fighters that are under contract with the UFC. Yes.
As you've been here this week and kind of talking to people, has there been any notable UFC fighters that have kind of been very approachable and agreeable to what you're doing, and also how have you found their demeanor when you introduce them to it?
They're all very approachable. They're all very nice, very kind. They're all aware. They're all knowledgeable. Actually, as far as trying to educate them, I think my job has been very easy. They know, and as I said, some of them are even educating me. But the common theme is that they're all afraid. And it was something I wasn't prepared for. I didn't even give it any thought. But these guys are not afraid. They're not afraid of anything. But outside, you take them outside the octagon and they're afraid. And the UFC is winning right now. And if it doesn't happen now, when is it ever going to happen? The sale, right now is the time.
What in particular are they expressing to you that they're afraid of?
That the UFC, I'll give you an example. They talk about UFC 200 when they yanked Diaz and McGregor off the card because McGregor didn't show up for that press conference from Iceland. Now, I'm not saying McGregor's right or McGregor's wrong or the UFC's right or wrong, but here are the two guys who are at the pinnacle, who are at the top of the sport, and the UFC was able to take millions of dollars out of their pocket by saying, you're not going to fight. The reason why you're not going to fight is because you didn't come in for this press conference. Now, maybe the UFC was right for doing that, but maybe they weren't right. If there was a grievance procedure, if it was any other sport, if it was baseball, basketball, football, there would be a neutral third-party arbitrator that would be available, and McGregor and his representatives would have an opportunity to present a case to the arbitrator saying why he shouldn't have to come in. The UFC would present a case as to why he should come in. The arbitrator is going to make a ruling. But right now, the UFC dictates what's going to happen. They dictate everything, and they're going to continue to dictate it until somebody pushes back.
I think a lot of the discussion has been about revenue sharing, how much of the revenue is going to the fighters. I mean, can a union do anything to get the books of a private company?
Once, well actually Lucas wanted to ask that one about the books.
So under the National Labor Relations Act, once you're certified, there's a provision in that act referred to as Section 8A5, and that gives the union the right to request all relevant information either related to the negotiation process or the grievance process. And if they don't provide that information, you can file a bad faith bargaining charge with the NLRB. But here's the caveat. When it comes to making them open the books, they have to plead poverty at the bargaining table in order to trigger that right under Section 885. If they don't plead poverty, there's mixed case law on whether they actually have to turn over the books.
Yes, sir.
Notwithstanding any challenge to certification that the UFC might make, what do you think is the most difficult part of getting a union actually certified?
Getting the membership to sign, to vote us in. Not that it would be difficult, but to get contact and access to all 600 fighters.
So does that mean you don't think it's going to be much of a challenge to get us designated as employees as opposed to independent contractors?
I'm gonna take that one.
That's an interesting one. So a lot of people have a mistaken belief that the burden would be on us to prove that we're employees or that the fighters are employees, but actually it's the opposite. Under NLRB case law, the burden is on the party who's saying that you're an independent contractor. So they have to come forward with the evidence to convince the NLRB that you're not an employee. And there was a 2014 decision from the NLRB, a Federal Express decision, which actually, they had always had a 10-factor test to determine who's an employee and who's an independent contractor. In 2014, they actually expanded that and they added an 11th factor, which is the individual's ability to earn a living outside of, here would be the UFC. And of course, that extra factor is going to lean strongly in our favor because obviously you're not allowed to go fight anywhere else if you're under contract with the UFC. So with that 2014 decision, it actually became easier to prove employee over independent contractor status. Now, with that said, the board changes with the political party that's in the White House. So come next year, if we have a Donald Trump presidency, the board could change and their case law could change. But right now, it's in our favor.
I mean, this is an argument that you might make after certification, but can you discuss the certification process itself?
Absolutely.
How many fighters do you feel you need? Once you have the signatures, I mean, you can get certified pretty quickly.
So Jeff, there's roughly 600, is that what you?
It changes every day, but yeah, it's in that neighborhood.
So in order to trigger an election, you have to show the NLRB a sufficient showing of interest. And what that means is because this group is currently unrepresented, you have to have 30% of the group sign authorization cards. Once the NLRB determines that those are legitimate cards, they will then start the election process. And once you get into an election process, you have to have 50% plus one vote yes on the union. And if that happens, you're certified.
Are the authorization cards public or confidential?
They are confidential and anonymous. The employer never knows who signed and who didn't.
So do you have to get everybody to, in one building, hand these out and say, hey, look, we have all 650 X people here, and then you pass them out and people vote yay or nay? Is that how that goes, or can you mail them out and within a certain amount of time have to come back? What's the process? How cumbersome is that?
The authorization cards?
Yes.
There are many different ways you can do it. You can mail them out, they can actually print them online if they would want to, and just as recent as last year, the NLRB actually allowed electronic cards to be submitted as well. So they try to make it as easy as possible.
So anyway, internationally, since we're a global sport, internationally, everybody can go on there as long as you have the internet, some form of access. You can get on there, sign on, say yes, and that would be anonymous as well.
Absolutely.
Other than IP address and everything else. Right on.
Actually, that's a really good point. There are a lot of non-U.S. citizens and international fighters. If you're looking at 30% of a roster to certify an election, what does the roster consist of?
The roster, I would propose a bargaining unit that consists of all currently employed UFC fighters. Now, with respect to the international citizens, unless they only perform their UFC work specifically overseas, and they never set foot in the United States, in that instance, the UFC might make an argument that they shouldn't be included in the bargaining unit, but the case law on that has gone each way too. For instance, there's a number of companies where they have Canadian, I work with the MLS referees, there's a number of Canadian-based MLS referees, but they were included in the bargaining unit because they come into the United States to do work for a US-based employer.
Yes.
Jeff, have you guys been able to like canvass a cross-section of fighters and get a good feel for like, you know, who's receiving bonuses, who's receiving a cut of the pay-per-view money that comes in? Is it top-heavy to the stars, or does it funnel down?
It's interesting that you say that because there's always going to be a disparity amongst how much the fighters weigh, just like there's a disparity in every single sport, which how much the athletes make. One of the things that I would have if we become a union is information available to all agents what all fighters are making. See, right now the UFC, this is how they operate. They make that a secret. So other agents can't talk to other agents and say, oh, how much did you get your guy for this fight? That information is not accessible. You know, as an agent in baseball, I have the information at my fingertips what every single player is making. And that assists me and helps me in negotiating. Of course the UFC wants to keep their agents in the dark. It helps them. But if there's a union where the agents have access to all the salary information, all the pay-per-view information, all the bonus information, it will make them more effective as negotiators.
You've been involved in baseball. What is the cut that ownership takes versus what players get?
It varies every year, but it's pretty close to 50-50. All the major sports are around 50-50.
Any idea what it is in the UFC?
Well, the only thing that I was able to find was there's comments that Lorenzo had made, where I think he said it was something like 86-14 or whatever, but somewhere in that neighborhood. I mean, it may be true, may not be, I don't know. They don't have to turn over their books and records. But I really don't think it's anywhere close to 50-50.
Have you reached out to agents and managers so far? And if yes, how big is it?
The agent community's been great. I called them up. I think they relate to me very well because that's where I come from. I know that the Major League Baseball Players Union has relied upon me very heavily the last 30 years when they've had labor strife, whether it's been strikes, lockouts, collusion, unfair labor practices. And I'm a big source of information I communicate from the union to the players. So I think that the agents in the UFC understand it the same way. If we're successful and if we become a union, there's going to be more money involved for everybody, including the agents. So they've done nothing but support it and endorse it. And a lot of them have had their fighters call me. They say, here, call Jeff, we want you to speak to him.
Have you been able to obtain an endorsement from any number of contenders or champions or anybody like that, whether anonymously or even just with their name?
Right. I'm talking to the fighters that are at 10-10, the entry-level guys all the way up to the top, and I'm treating them all the same because they'll all become part of that union membership, and they're all entitled to the same benefits and protection, so I treat them all alike. It doesn't matter if you're a big star or you're an entry-level guy.
So once the union is full, formed, how long do you think it'll take for the changes to come about? Will it be an immediate thing, or the things like the pension and the greater percentage of the revenues?
Right, see, that's a great question, because I think that's actually going to be the hardest part. And the reason why that's going to be the hardest part is, let's say we became a union tomorrow morning, and I knocked on the UFC's door and I said, okay, I'm here, let's start the bargaining, let it begin. You know, I want this, I want that. They're not going to say right away, sure, here it is, and hand it over. I think that might take time, and that might be a evolutionary process. But, you know, something, it's a cinch by the inch, but hard by a yard. I'd like to see some progress going towards that 50-50 division split. Yes.
Lucas, can you speak on that? I mean, I would think legally, if you're a certified union, there is some kind of time frame that they have to negotiate with you, correct?
There's no specific time frame, but they can't refuse to meet with you. And they also can't say, we're too busy to meet with you. There's something called the busy negotiator defense, and I've actually filed bad faith bargaining charges against the sports league for using that defense. They said we were locked up with this group, so we couldn't talk to you. And that was a bad faith bargaining tactic. So there's no specific timeline, but they can't refuse to meet. They have to meet at close intervals under the law. And again, if they don't do any of these, you file bad faith bargaining charges. And what's the beauty of bad faith bargaining charges is the NLRB acts as like a prosecutor. So once you file the charge, they do all the work. And so it's not a labor-intensive process. And they are very union-friendly, the NLRB. So just in terms of comparison, when the Major League Soccer referees, much smaller group obviously, and much less money, but when they started from scratch, they were certified in May of 2013, and they had a fully signed CBA in March of the following year. So it was just under a year that it took.
And Jeff, you had kind of made it seem like there was at least a possibility that an active fighter was going to speak tonight. Was that a possibility? Was it something that fell apart, or?
It still is a possibility if he walks in the door.
Okay. How much of that is right? How, you know, I meant like, you know, on the podium speaking. It made it seem like that was a possibility.
No, not on the podium speaking, would be in the audience.
Would be in the room, right?
Yes.
Okay. How important do you think that is that you have sort of active fighters who are publicly speaking about this and not just anonymously? Do you need that, or can you get it done without it?
Probably can get it done without it. Obviously, our jobs would be a lot easier if we had a lot of fighters who were visible. I've promised all the fighters that no one will be visible. They'll all be the invisible man, woman, until we have 500 plus, because there's strength in numbers and they don't want to be singled out. So I want to protect those right now and have them remain anonymous. I mean, I know there's some in this room right now, and I think they're very brave and should be applauded for being here. Obviously, they're not afraid of bullies, but it would make our jobs a lot easier if fighters became visible, but I promise them that won't happen until we have 500 plus. Yes?
If you're successful in certifying the union, let's make an assumption that the employer of the UFC will try to challenge that. They'll say, oh, they're independent contractors, and it'll be litigated, and that'll cost money. How do you plan to fund such a fight?
I guess I've got a lot of pro bono work ahead of me. Right now, we have the budget of a startup. So, and the work I've done thus far has been on my own time. So, I don't know how else to answer that. I mean, that's very common with new unions. When they certify, they don't have any money, and you got to get certified. You got to start collecting dues. That's the only way to gain revenue, unless, of course, you start a donation drive, which I've seen in other unions.
Have you estimated what litigation costs might be to get you to the point of being a bargaining unit where they have to sit at the table?
You're probably looking, depending on how many issues are litigated, anywhere in the range of $30,000 to $50,000.
Well, actually, I want to try to tackle that question too. This week, I've received tons of calls of people who are looking for work, tons of people who are lending a helping hand, and I've received calls from people, venture capitalist type groups, that believe in the cause and have been willing to underwrite whatever costs that we've had, and I've respectfully declined that, but I don't think that that'll be a problem if push came to shove.
I think one of the things that a lot of us are worried about overall in the whole picture of everything is that there's going to be a lot of Johnny-come-latelys that come in that are really, that understand how bad we need this, and they're going to be very, very pointed. And I think a lot of us don't have the intellectual capabilities to understand really what's going on. We're going to have to rely on a lot of other people that we feel might not have our best interest in mind and maybe more interest in lining our pockets. How do you feel that over time you can win our trust in that situation and make it realize, like, that you've been involved in this for a while, that you've done your homework, you understand that the trials, trials, tribulations, the stresses, making camps, not getting injured, the whole struggle that we go under. It seems like this is like the really sexy hot button thing to be worried about right now. And then it seems like if there's trouble, if there's something else, if it doesn't work, then somebody will be off to the races looking for the next sexy thing. And that's the conversations I've had with fighters. That's what it is. That's the biggest concern. Is that anybody that comes up and approaches us, or talks to us, or sends us a letter or whatever else we get, it's just a bunch of bullshit until they can find out if it really works or not. If it does, cool, we'll stick around. If it doesn't, we'll bounce.
Well, the only way a fighter will ever be able to know that is if we become a union and we collectively bargain and we get stuff for them that they don't currently have. I mean, if we don't achieve their objectives, they would throw us out, as we would deserve to be thrown out. But if they empowered us and through collective bargaining we were able to gain rights and things and benefits that they don't currently have, I think they would be happy with that and they would keep us in power. Yes.
Somewhat unique to your situation as opposed to other sports in the past is that you're not only fighting a potential quote-unquote employer, but perhaps other unions trying to organize a similar effort. And you know that this is happening right now. There are other people trying to convince fighters not to go with you and to go with them. Can you give us an update on that struggle, if you will?
Sure. I would say that the biggest group that's been against us is the MMAFA. And I want you guys to look at this that we have here for a second, because I want to show what the differences are. If you see here, okay, first of all, as I said, they're an association. They don't need to be elected or voted in. And we are a union and we must be voted in. First difference. Okay. The second thing is, as the question was asked earlier about other promotions like Bellator, they're retired guys, they're current guys, they're guys in other promotions, they're trainers, managers, things of that sort. We're only about guys who are currently under contract with the UFC, so that's another distinction. Next page. But this is the best part. This is their mission statement, the MMAFA's, which, I mean, to me looks like the Gettysburg Address, but I've highlighted something here in yellow because I talked about earlier about there being an overlap. And the only overlap here is that there wants to be an improvement in the economic conditions. And our mission statement, which I came up with, a little bit stealing from Robin Hood, but it was rob from the rich and take to the poor. I want to take from the rich and give to the poor. That's our mission statement, that's it. So when you're talking about this economic overlap, and I've been very complimentary, I've said nice things, I've taken the high road about the MMAFA this whole time, but the bottom line is where there is this overlap here, which is just improving the economic benefits. What have they done since 2009? The fighters' condition right now is as deplorable as it could possibly be. Nothing has been done, and they've had 7 full years to improve those conditions for the fighters, and nothing has occurred. Give us 7 days of collective bargaining with the UFC, and let's see how far that takes us. This is a completely different arena. Like I said, I still support them and their efforts, promoting the Ali Act, I'm all for it. But as far as improving the economic conditions of their membership, it hasn't occurred, and it's been 7 years, and time's up. It's time to change quarterbacks, put us in, give us a chance to see what we can do as far as improving the economic benefits.
And can you, let's say you become a union tomorrow, and you sit at the table with them, all goes well, can you look at things retroactively? Meaning, can you look, are you confident that you can then look at the TV deal and the Reebok deal and say, okay, let's see how much this is, what percentage are we going to get? Or can you only work from the point that you are, unionized and then move forward? Basically, what's done is done, the milk has been spilled, you can only work from that point forward.
I haven't given that much thought, to be honest. Possibly. I think everything's up in the air. I think in the beginning we're going to have to take baby steps. First thing that comes to mind is I'd like to get the minimums raised. Right now at 10 and 10, there's a lot of fighters, you talk to them, they can't afford to fight, especially if they lose. They can't afford to pay their corner, they can't afford to pay their training, and I think that the very first thing I would do is I'd want to get the minimums raised. medical insurance would probably be next thing on the agenda. I was talking to a fighter today, he said, well, yeah, I realize if I get hurt in the octagon, I'm gonna be covered, but if I get cancer, I'm on my own. I said, yeah, you're right, you're on your own. So I think those would be probably the two things at the top of the agenda.
And are you concerned that they might sign a new TV deal before you can unionize to avoid this issue?
No, I'm not concerned at all, because I want them to sign the most lucrative TV deal possible. I'm pulling for them, because if they do, they have to show something on TV, right? They gotta show people fighting in a cage. If they don't have people fighting in a cage, they're not gonna get paid their revenue. I just want some of their TV revenue to come to the people who are fighting in the cage, because they're the ones that drive the business. Yes?
I'm curious, I had thought that one of the ways to get more money for the fighters was to use bidding with the other promotions, but since you're not talking about that, how are you gonna get more money without the competing against the other promotions?
Because I have 600 fighters in my hip pocket that will say, you know what, if you don't raise the minimums, you're not gonna be able to broadcast the fight. If you don't give the 600 fighters and their families medical insurance, you have no fights to broadcast. You have no licensing. You have no anything without the fighters. So that's where the leverage and control is in the unity of the fighters, by them banding together. That's how we're able to improve their economic lot.
So ultimately, what we have as fighters in the union is that we'll be able to go on strike. Is that our
Strike is a weapon. It's a last resort. Hopefully that wouldn't happen. Hopefully, as Lucas had mentioned, they bargain in good faith. They'd come to the table, and we would get a deal that's fair and appropriate for them as well. I mean, I don't want some grossly lopsided deal, which currently it is right now for the fighters. I want it to be fair and equitable for both sides. But the leverage becomes when you have 600 people that are all banded together. Yes.
Given the wage and hour implications of transportation from independent contractor to employee, are you working with not labor lawyers but employment lawyers? And if so, is the specter of back pay been considered at all for a treasure chest in order to fund not only the movement, but any procedures thereafter once the union has been recognized?
I'm not sure I understand what you mean by back pay.
Well, if it turns out that they were employees and thus have the right to unionize, they would also then be entitled to back pay for, in my understanding, up to 4 years for having been an employee that had been paid wrongly. So for instance, if a fighter can show that she has not been paid minimum wage and or overtime and or breaks, etc., they're going to get huge amounts of back pay plus their attorney's fees paid for. I think that is where you could potentially look to fund the run.
It's a very interesting question. I get it now in terms of being misclassified over the past 4 years, and it's definitely an avenue you could look at. That's also going to take litigation to figure it out one way or the other. So while it could provide a treasure chest if you were successful, it's going to cost money to litigate it on the front end.
But almost by definition, if you're certified and you get the recognition as employees, I don't know that they'd be able to argue in good faith that for the past period of time prior to them becoming employees, they weren't. Because it's those circumstances that you're using to say they deserve a union.
Right. What's important to keep in mind, however, is that when you're in these different venues, so if you're in state court or federal court, that they actually, when they're looking, or if you're in a tax court, they actually use different factors than the NLRB applies. And if the NLRB makes the decision, that's not precedent setting with respect to these other forums.
No, they're analogies. I mean,
It's closely related, and it would definitely be persuasive and helpful, but it's not automatic.
Yep.
There currently exist unions where employees have to accrue a certain number of hours in order to gain admission to that union. Would there be some sort of minimum of fights that fighters would need to compete in the UFC in order to be a part of the union? And if not, then would there be some sort of tiering to the importance of the fighters and their contribution in terms of dues? Because a fighter with one fight in the UFC wouldn't necessarily maybe have the same leverage as someone with 20 fights.
What's common that I've seen is a percentage-based due structure. So you choose 1% or 1.5% or whatever it is, and then that's someone who's making 12 and 12, or someone who's making $3 million. they're going to pay their equal share percentage share instead of a flat rate, which you see in a lot of industrial unions where they're all on the same pay scale. And I wouldn't envision, I mean, I know what you're saying in terms of the minimum fights, and it would be like a probationary program. So a lot of unions have, you gotta be on the job 6 months, and then you pass your probationary and you become in the union. I don't see that, and Jeff can probably speak to baseball and the others, I don't really see that in the professional sports arena. Jeff, I mean, when a guy comes up from the minor leagues, is he getting the league minimum?
Yeah, he gets the league minimum, and all the major leaguers pay the same amount of money, whether it's a guy who's making $20 million a year or $2 million
They
a year.
pay a flat fee.
They pay a flat fee, but it's easily affordable. No, I've never had a player come up to me and say, wow, these union dues are just killing me. I don't think I'm going to be able to afford it. So, and we would obviously create a scenario. The dues would be voted on by the board. It would be the fighters saying, this is what we're comfortable with paying. It would be something that we would dictate. It would be something that the fighters would dictate.
But in something like the NFL, they have a minimum number of years in order to receive a pension, for example. I don't know if that was addressed already, but how would you guys approach such a situation?
Same thing. In Major League Baseball, it works like this. You have 10 years of service in the major leagues, you become fully vested for a pension. There are other ways, too, to get partial vesting and whatever, but we have an economist, he's not here right now, it would be Andrew Zimbalist, and I would rely upon him heavily to guide me down that process as to what an appropriate amount would be to receive for the fighters, at what age, after how many fights, and that's what we would work for.
And that would all be from people from the time they were unionized going forward, or that'd be cumulative throughout their career?
Well, as I said earlier in my remarks, one of the fighters said to me, there's something that's important to me, and they brought up Chuck Liddell, that was the fighter's name that was brought up, I said, Liddell, would somebody like that get a pension? And I first said, no, as time's passed, he's not the current UFC guy. And the fighter said, I'm not really comfortable with that. I think I kind of want to take care of those guys who came before me, and I thought about it, because there's a tremendous loyalty like that in baseball, okay? A loyalty to the guys before, to the guys current, and to the guys that will come after them. And I thought about it, and I liked it, but it's not my decision. It'd be the decision of the fighters. And if the fighters voted, you know what, we have money in our coffers now because we have a part of the TV deal, and it's there, and we can afford it, and we want to designate certain retired fighters to get a pension, I would defer to the fighters on that, and I follow their instructions.
Jeff, given the way the sport is structured, does there need to be some sort of guaranteed contract system? Because as you know now, sometimes there's a big hullabaloo about, oh, this fighter has signed an 8-fight contract, he has one bad performance and he's cut. Do the fighters need guaranteed contracts like they get, even if you don't perform well in the NBA, you're still getting paid. Even if you're injured, you're still getting paid. Does that need to happen in this sport to help the fighters know that they have some sort of security, even if they're not performing or if they're injured, etc.?
Yes, I understand exactly where you're going with it. In fact, this is one of the biggest problems I have with the current UFC contracts. You'll sign a guy to a 5-fight deal, he fights once, and then who knows when the next fight's going to be. Even if he wins, or she wins, it doesn't matter. The UFC has total control and power over that, as to when and where and who that person's going to fight. That can't exist. There has to be some sort of certainty, some sort of guarantee in place. Haven't worked those ideas through yet 100%. Like I said, I would have to consult with the board of fighters as to how those guarantees would be structured. But how the system works currently right now, it's grossly lopsided, it's unfair, it's at the whim of the UFC, what they want to do, when they want to do it, how they want to do it, and they can play with people's fates, and I just don't think that that's right. I don't think it's valid, and that will be something we work very hard to try and change.
How do you answer the question, because I've received it a lot, someone comes up to you and says, what's in it for you? What's in it for Jeff Boris? What's his true motivation? Why is he doing this? What's the answer to that question?
Well, I've climbed a lot of mountains in baseball, and I think that we could do a lot of good for a lot of people who are really in need right now, and I find a lot of satisfaction in that. If I was able to make a change like this and help the industry, I think we'd be making history.
What provoked you specifically? Did you hear a nightmare story or something like that?
The nightmare story was when Boyd Pearson showed me the UFC bout agreement between McGregor and Diaz, and that's when I started having nightmares. Yeah.
What are kind of your immediate goals and what's more of the long-term goals? What do you want to achieve and by when, I guess is what I'm asking.
Get the fighters to sign solicitation cards as soon as possible.
Yeah, but there's got to be some sort of target you've got to set yourself. You're not going to try and do that for 10 years, I guess, because you're saying that the MMA, FA, or whatever they're called,
haven't done anything for 7 years, so.
I don't have a crystal ball, I can't predict the future, I don't know how long it's gonna take. Obviously, it's sooner rather than later. I don't know, I mean, we've been guessing and saying maybe it's gonna take us 6 months to do. Hopefully that can be achieved in a shorter period of time. It might take longer, but I think the fighters either get it, they understand it, and they know they need it, and they know they need it now, and we'll be able to accomplish it, or we won't. So hopefully we'll have our answer within 6 months, but I'm not sure.
Just to piggyback on that, I mean, just for that first step, the signing of the cards, is there, like, legally, is there a timetable on that, or is that open-ended? Like, could that ultimately end up taking as long as it needs to take to get that number?
They're valid for 1 year after they've been signed and dated.
Okay, so if it was anything past a year, you would need to get those re-signed?
Correct.
So do you guys have a good database of all 650 fighters' emails, information, telephone numbers, addresses, where you can mass mail, you can email, you can blast, you can do whatever? Do you guys have that?
Yeah, Dana White's sending his cell phone over in the morning, and I'm gonna
I got it.
transfer it over. I wish you were.
Yeah.
The answer is no, we don't.
How confident are you that the number of contract fighters is 600?
Like I said, it changes every day, but from what's out, I mean, it could be more, it could be less, but from all accounts, it's somewhere in that neighborhood.
Is there any way to get a solid number of that?
Yeah, if Dana would tell me that information.
I mean,
we'd go
obviously, I mean,
to-
yeah, I mean,
No.
Put a different way, how many signatures do you really need to be comfortable?
30% of, if our target's 600.
What do you think? How many fighters do you think are under contract with UFC? Do you have an idea?
I'd probably say around 575 to 625,
Okay.
something like that. And depends if they clean house. I haven't checked it last time they cleaned house.
Okay.
But then again, you don't know who signed because they tell when they sign people, they don't tell you. You can't say anything until they make an announcement. So
Right.
there could be another 50, 60 in the wings just waiting.
That's correct.
Lucas, when they sign the cards, can they unsign them at any point? Can they say, I've changed my mind?
They can reach out to the union and ask to withdraw their authorization card.
And you said they last for a year. Are they exclusive? Because the cards we're referring to are before you get certified, correct? So,
Correct.
So if they sign with you, does that mean that you know, if another startup group comes, or if, you know, MMAFA decides to make a run at a union, can they sign multiple cards or just one?
They can sign multiple.
Okay.
And I will just mention that there's a very fast way, if you get the cards, called voluntary recognition. So if you have, let's say you have 80% of the cards, you reach out to the employer and say, we'll send these cards to an independent third party for a card count. And if they deem there's a sufficient majority, you have to voluntarily recognize the union. I don't really see that happening here, but Jeff could always ask Dana.
Just from a logistics standpoint, what's that process like, the signing of the cards? Is it that simple? You just sign your name and then that's it?
It's a one-page card, and it says, I hereby authorize the name of the union to collectively bargain on my behalf. It's name, signature, date. That's it.
I'm curious, you said that the MMAFA, that they're not competition because they're an association and you're a union, and that you support the Ali Act too. Is that something that you would actually push for, or is it just something that you wouldn't oppose?
Sure, we can coexist with the Ali Act. I don't oppose it at all. I hope it happens.
Cool, so maybe it's incorrect to call the other groups competition then, because you guys aren't in competition at all.
That's what I think. I think we're not, but they've been tweeting stuff since we made our announcement last Thursday. They've been tweeting out nothing but negative things about us.
Have you guys communicated at all? What's
No.
up with them too?
I have not.
Do you have any interest in that?
Well, if they were to announce, you know what, we no longer want to become an association, we want to become a union and we're your competition, I'd be more than happy to enter the octagon with them and debate all these issues. As to
Yeah, but
who's
why
more
go head to
qualified.
head? Like why? I mean, whoever has the biggest nuts doesn't win. I mean, it's whoever cumulatively gets together is the winner. Like I understand. Like it seems like it's just a different perspective. I don't know.
Well, they're doing something completely different. They haven't announced their intention to become a union, and if they did, or any group that's out there for that matter, and there are some other groups that are out there that have that intention, I feel free to debate them on any of these topics regarding them being more qualified or us being more qualified, and let the fighters decide which group they want to have.
Why can't you all just? Why can't we all just get along? Like, for real, like, why are y'all pissing on each other there? I mean, this doesn't make sense to me. Like, everybody has the greater good in mind. So why are you this and this and them this and that? Like that doesn't make sense to me. Like that's what I'm talking about. The Johnny come latelys. That dude, Okay, all right.
The reason why is because, as I stated, when this first came about, I took the high road. I didn't think that they're doing what we're doing. They're doing something completely different. They've been around for a long time, and I showed them respect and said, go ahead and do what you do. But it's been nonstop with what they've been tweeting out about what we're doing. And it's like, okay, you know, I'm only going to let sand be kicked in my face and be bullied around for so long, and I want to be professional about it. So that's why I showed the differences. That's why I showed the differences in the mission statement, and that's why I focused it down to where the overlap is, which is the improvement in the economic conditions. Now, if you want to talk about that, which is really not their job, then they failed at their job. They haven't improved the economic conditions of the fighters. And we haven't even had a chance yet because we haven't been empowered to collectively bargain on behalf of the fighters. So given the chance, like I said, let's see what we can do. They've had 7 years. Let's see what we can do. That's the only part that I dissected out of what their, and it was out of their mission statement, as to where there might be some sort of overlap. Other than that, our paths don't cross.
So what's the plan for fighter representation? You know, in baseball you have teams and team representatives. It's an individual sport, so how does that shake out for fighters?
It's basically the same thing. Yeah, on every team in the major leagues, they have one player rep and then they have an alternate. I'm looking for fighters that are passionate, take these issues to heart, they care about it, they're very cerebral about it, and the fighters will vote amongst themselves as to who they want their representatives to be and to how big the board should be. I'm thinking maybe 13 fighters or so, could be more, could be less, but I'll let the fighters decide that because I want the fighters who are going to be the ones that are running the union. We're just the instruments of the fighters, that's all.
And right now you say you're focusing strictly on the UFC, but what's the plan for addressing other organizations in the future? Like how far do you have to get with the UFC before you start considering fighters in Bellator or World Series of Fighting?
I don't know, we're going to have to get a collective bargaining agreement in place and make great strides on behalf of the membership, show that we're actually doing a lot of good for these people, and then we might consider it in the future, but there's no immediate plans for Bellator or any other promotion.
You would have to get separate collective bargaining agreements for each employer. So if there was a showing of interest from the other entities or the fighters from the other entities, they would have to collect authorization cards, and this one union could represent everybody, but you would have to negotiate separate collective bargaining agreements.
You chose to unionize from the top down. Did you ever think about going the other way, working your way up?
In terms of what?
Unionizing the fighters?
We're, like I said, we're dealing with guys who are at entry level, the 10 and 10 player, 10 and 10 fighters, all the way up to the top. So everybody all at the same time. And there's actually more people at the bottom than at the top. They need it more. They need it more. Yes.
When just addressing the UFC fighters, obviously there's this idea to have them installed as employees. But if you examine it from another example, you could look at all fighters across the board and really just examine them as 1099 contractors and still have some sort of union that provides things like health care. Has that ever been a consideration?
Look, right now the UFC in their contracts make the players sign. There's a paragraph in there where they certify that they're independent contractors. I mean, you know, could they provide them with medical insurance? You know, I guess they could, but like I said, it's been very self-serving on their part to have them labeled as independent contractors because, you know, if you look at the employer-employee relationship, they pretty much dictate everything. Who they're going to fight, when they're going to fight, what they're going to wear when they fight. So they're employer-employee.
Were you referring to an association essentially that doesn't get certified?
Maybe it's more of a guild than I'm thinking about.
Right. That's a possibility. So they wouldn't be legally obligated to bargain with that entity as they would a certified union. And in terms of withholding services, if you're not a union, an association can actually be sued under the Sherman Antitrust Act. I know there's an active lawsuit against the UFC. Those lawsuits can go both ways. Once you're a certified union, you're exempt from the Sherman Antitrust Act.
Anything else? Go ahead.
I was wondering, I've been hearing that the Screen Actors Guild, that the entertainment aspect, that maybe the fighters, as a result of how significant the entertainment aspect is, should look at that. I was wondering if that's any kind of blueprint that you're considering at all, or if you're more focusing on the sports teams.
I mean, the collective bargaining arrangements that I'm familiar with are only in the sports setting. So, Screen Actors Guild, I've never taken a look at it. I'm pretty well versed in baseball, basketball, football, hockey, and what their basic agreements are. And the one that, like I said, is the gold standard is baseball, and I would try to pattern the UFC's fighters' rights as closely as I possibly can to baseballs.
It's what you're going to pick for your comparators, right? So if you go into collective bargaining, you need to look at relevant comparators in the industry. So if you're negotiating for baseball, you're going to look at the other leagues and see what they're making compared to the revenue. We do the same thing with the officials in all the leagues. You look at what the hockey officials are getting paid, who's under the curve, and then that gives you an argument to say we need to be either at the curve or above that curve. And so it's a great question. It's just who you pick as your comparators. And I will note that, to me this is important, and I've mentioned it to a few people and maybe it gets lost, but so this union is what they refer to as an independent union, which means you're not affiliated with an AFL-CIO industrial union. And I work with a lot of independent unions, and what's nice about the independent unions is if you're affiliated with a larger union, whether it's the Teamsters or the TWU, part of your dues are kicked up to the international. They're going to the Teamsters International so that money can help them negotiate truck driver contracts and so on and so forth. So the beauty of the independent union is your dues revenue stays just with your union.
This might be a stupid question because I don't know how unions run or make money. Is it strictly the dues that are going to help this thing actually operate, or is it part of this collective bargaining that a percentage of the overhead covers what your cost is to help make this happen? I guess if there's a pool of money that's coming in, you want to try to give as much to the fighters as possible. How much is kind of being siphoned off to make sure that the union can run? Or is it just the dues that pay all that?
It's all of the above. I mean, there would be dues, but there could be licensing agreements, there could be share in the media revenue. There's all sorts of ways for the union, for revenue to come into the union.
It's mostly dues, and it can be assessments. There's assessments when you run, if you're going into a contract year, I've seen unions do assessments where, in addition to the dues, they say there's going to be X amount, everyone knows X amount in order to build a war chest. And it's also when you go into negotiations, a lot of mature unions will have strike funds in case you are locked out or you are on strike, that the union can help the individuals who are withholding their services keep on living through that process.
They actually have a good plan in place in baseball. What they've done over the years is that they always hold back a percentage of the player's licensing money. So let's just take $100,000 as an example. Say every player who has a full year of major league service would get $100,000. The union takes a percentage of that and they build a war chest for the players. So in the event that there's some form of a work stoppage, the players will have some money to draw upon at that time. I'd like to come up with a similar system like that for the fighters, but that's further on down the road. There's other things that are at the top of the pecking order that have to be addressed first.
Has your process of gathering the authorization cards begun at this point?
We've not sent out one single card yet. Like I said, we're only a week old. Anything else? Okay, thanks for coming and keep the press going. It's really helpful for us because when I talk to fighters, they've read or heard or watched, listened to something that you guys have reported, and I really appreciate that. It's been tremendous.